record. So if you need to move away from the webinar for any reason, you can refer back to this recording at a later date. It will be posted to Mid-Atlantic Arts website by next week. So again, welcome. My name is Sarah Lewis. I'm the Program Director, Performing Arts and Accessibility Coordinator here at Mid-Atlantic Arts. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman with very short brown hair and a white button-down shirt over my 7-month pregnant belly today. And I'm zooming in from my home, which is located on land known as Baltimore, Maryland. I want to acknowledge the Piscataway and Susquehannock people as historic stewards of this land and the enduring presence of the Piscataway, Lumbee, and Eastern Band of Cherokee community members in Baltimore City today. If you're on the East Coast of the continental US, I hope you're staying inside and staying safe today with the air quality warnings that we're dealing with. And as an access check-in, I may be a bit wigglier than I sometimes am on a webinar, but I'm glad that you could join us today for this interest form info session. Today, I'm going to share information about Mid-Atlantic Tours, focusing on the roster artist interest form, which is a relatively new component of the program that allows artists to express interest in being considered for the Mid-Atlantic Tours roster. This information session is meant to serve as both an overview and a resource. But before submitting to the interest form, please make sure to review the Mid-Atlantic Tours roster artist interest form overview and the drafted fiscal year 25 Mid-Atlantic Tours guidelines, which you can see at midatlanticarts.org. And I'm also going to be posting in the chat. You can reach out to me with questions about the overview and the guidelines or anything you hear in today's session anytime. My email is slewis@midatlanticarts.org, and I'll share it a few times through this presentation. Working on entering them into the chat right now. Okay, now some housekeeping. I have about 20 minutes of information to share with you throughout this slide deck, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. For today's session, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We do have live captioning for today's session. Kara is here with us. Thank you, Kara. To turn on live captions, on the control bar of your Zoom screen, select More, and then select Show Captions. Throughout your process with the roster artist interest form, if you are in need of any accommodation, please contact me, Sarah Lewis, at 410-539-6656, extension 110, or email slewitus@midatlanticarts.org. Before we get started discussing Mid-Atlantic Tours and the roster artist interest form, I want to share a little bit about Mid-Atlantic Arts with you. Mid-Atlantic Arts supports presenters, artists, and organizations through unique programming, grant support, partnerships, and information sharing. The organization was created in 1979, and it's aligned with the region's state arts councils, as well as the National Endowment for the Arts. Mid-Atlantic Arts is one of 6 regional arts organizations, and we combine the federal funding that we receive from the NEA with private support from corporations, foundations, and individuals to nurture diverse artistic expression while connecting people to meaningful arts experiences within our region and beyond. So you can learn more about Mid-Atlantic Arts and our work at midatlanticarts.org. Now let's jump into talking about Mid-Atlantic Tours, what you're all here to discuss today. Before we discuss the roster artist interest form itself, I'll share a bit about the program. Mid-Atlantic Tours is a grant opportunity for presenters in Mid-Atlantic Arts geographic region. That region is listed here on the screen, and it includes presenters in Delaware, DC, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Virginia, West Virginia, as well as the native nations that share this geography. The program is funded through the NEA's Regional Touring Program, and it supports the robust touring of selected roster artists throughout Mid-Atlantic Arts geographic region, with at least 2 engagement activities in each presenter's community. What we're talking about today is how an artist can express interest in being considered for the roster through the roster artist interest form. And the fiscal year we're here to discuss today is FY25, which runs from July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So artists interested in being considered for the FY25 Mid-Atlantic Tours roster must be open to touring during that time period. And we'll talk more about that in the criteria section. For any presenters who might be on the call, the finalized FY25 Mid-Atlantic Tours guidelines will be released with the finalized artist roster in late fall of 2023. That's this upcoming fall. You are welcome to reach out to me with direct presenter-focused questions via email, and there will be a separate webinar focused on the presenter process for Mid-Atlantic Tours, and that will be announced this fall when the roster is coming out. But today we're going to focus on the artist process to submit to the interest form. Both prospective Mid-Atlantic Tours roster artists and presenters interested in the program can review the draft guidelines available at midatlanticarts.org, and I'm also putting them in the chat right now. Keep in mind that these are draft guidelines, and the formal FY25 guidelines will be released with the final roster in the fall. So if selected for the roster artists, tour managers, and presenters work together to plan at least 2 engagement activities at each presenter venue. At least one of those 2 engagement activities must include a performance or performative component of at least 30 minutes that is open to the public. It can be ticketed or free. It can be repeated multiple times or happen just once. So now that you've heard more about the Mid-Atlantic Tours program in general, we'll get started with what we're here to discuss today, which is the process for artists to express interest in being considered for the Mid-Atlantic Tours roster through the interest form. This form is a relatively new component of the Mid-Atlantic Tours process. This is the 2nd year we've offered the option for artists to indicate their interest in being considered. In the past, the roster has been assembled by Mid-Atlantic Arts staff in direct conversation with potential artists or their managers. And the interest form was developed to create a transparent process by which artists and their agent or manager can express interest in being included for the upcoming fiscal year. It's important to note that this interest form is not a grant application. I'll say that again. This form does not constitute a grant application. Selection to the Mid-Atlantic Tours roster does not include any financial exchange directly between the artists included on the roster and Mid-Atlantic Arts. Rather, artists selected to the roster will work with a tour manager and with Mid-Atlantic Arts staff to determine the subsidy awards that are made directly to presenters in the region for presentation of the roster artist during the project period. So, said another way, if you are a Mid-Atlantic Tours roster artist, presenters in Mid-Atlantic Arts program region can receive up to 50% subsidy towards your artist fee if they engage with you during the project period. So now we're going to talk about the criteria that artists must meet to be included on the Mid-Atlantic Tour's roster. To be included on the roster, you should be a performing artist working in dance, folk and traditional performing arts forms, multidisciplinary performance, puppetry, music, or theater. You must be based in the Mid-Atlantic region, which we talked about earlier and again is listed on screen. You must be ready to tour a complete in-person or virtual performance, work, concerts, or short-form evening of no less than 30 minutes, plus at least one additional engagement activity between July 1st, 2024 and June 30th, 2025. Again, this is the project period. And finally, you need to have a tour manager or be experienced in managing tours yourself in order to be eligible. The tour manager will be the person who actually signs the MOU with Mid-Atlantic Arts. If you're self-managing, we will ask, if you're self-managing and you are considered as a finalist for the roster, we will ask for a reference from a presenter you've worked with recently about tour management. So who should complete the roster artist interest form? You can fill out the form if you are an artist meeting all the criteria I just described, or if you are the manager or agent of an artist meeting all of those criteria, or if you are a presenter wishing to nominate an artist that meets those criteria. Just make sure that if you're a presenter, you're giving the artist or their manager a heads up before you submit, because we will need eventually to talk directly with them. So once an artist, their manager or agent, or a presenter submits the roster artist interest form, these are the next steps. First, Mid-Atlantic Arts staff reviews your submission for eligibility. Next, a curatorial advisement panel is going to review the submissions based on selection priorities, and then they'll make finalist recommendations. The panel will be made up of peer curators, presenters, artists, and agents based in the Mid-Atlantic region. Artists finalists who are recommended by the curatorial panel are included in an interest survey to Mid-Atlantic region presenters. And based on the curator recommendations and the results of this survey, the final roster is assembled by Mid-Atlantic Arts staff. So now let's talk about the selection priorities for the Mid-Atlantic Tour's roster. These priorities will be shared with the curatorial advisement panel and will be used by Mid-Atlantic Arts staff when making final curatorial decisions for the roster. First, projected touring success for roster artists, tour feasibility, and presenter interest. This includes whether the artist has a history of touring or demonstrates preparedness for their first tour, whether they have a plan to engage with a tour manager, and how presenters responded through that presenter interest survey I mentioned. Next, broad representation of multiple performance genres. The roster will feature 6 artists or companies, and while we certainly cannot feature every genre of performance within the selection of 6 artists or companies, we want to make sure that we cover a wide range. Also, broad geographic representation from artists based in different states or jurisdictions in the Mid-Atlantic region will be considered. Similarly, within 6 artists, we cannot feature an artist from all 10 Mid-Atlantic region or state spaces, but we do want to do our best to engage folks from a range of states and jurisdictions through this program. Finally, we want to prioritize artists and creators who are actively engaged with diverse communities to engage the transformative power of the arts. And this language comes straight from Mid-Atlantic Arts organizational vision, and I'll talk a little bit more about what it means. So through Mid-Atlantic Tours, we want to engage artists whose practice connects them to people and communities, whether those communities are defined geographically or by identity or both. And there are so many ways for this to look, and so many artists, probably most of you on this call, doing this work every day. So for example, maybe you're interested in touring your work specifically to rural communities in the region, or maybe your work centers around connecting with queer youth, and that's something that you want to prioritize in your engagement activities. Or maybe you personally hold an identity that has been systemically and historically marginalized and underrepresented in the performing arts or in your performance genre. And the act of making work and performing connects you to a community of past, present, and future makers that share your identity. There's a question in the roster artist interest form that will ask you to talk about this. And if you have any questions or concerns about how to answer, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll talk about it. So here are the deadlines and important dates for prospective roster artists. The deadline for the interest form is June 22nd, 2023, and that'll be at midnight. The curatorial advisement panel will review submissions throughout July and make finalist recommendations. You can expect, if you've submitted, you can expect to hear one way or another by sometime during August about whether you will advance to the presenter interest survey stage. Then in early September 2023, finalist recommendations are sent via email to presenters in the Mid-Atlantic region. And finally, in October, artists and artist managers will be contracted for the 2024-2025 roster. Then, if you're selected, here are the important dates to consider. In fall of 2023, that's this coming fall, we will announce the roster along with the finalized guidelines. On March 28th of 2024, that will be the booking deadline for presenters to contract a Mid-Atlantic Tours artist. And then, as I've mentioned, the project period for artists to tour through the roster with subsidy will be July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So this is the last informational slide I have about the program to share with you today. We're going to take a quick look at the form itself, but I also want to encourage you, as we're looking at that, to think about your questions and go ahead and put them into the Q&A. I do see we have a few questions in there already, which is fantastic. So let me see. I'm going to switch my screen share now to the form. Okay, here we are. This is the FY25 Mid-Atlantic Tours Roster Artist Interest Form. It is a Microsoft form. This is very similar to a Google form. The form asks, first it starts with an overview of much of what we just discussed. It asks who's submitting this form. It asks that you've reviewed the overview, which has all the info we've talked about today. It asks for the artist or company name, the lead contact name and email and phone number, what state or jurisdiction you represent, the genre that you're working in, your bio, your web presence, your plans for engaging a tour manager, your fee range, which should just be a rough estimate. Know that if you move on to the finalist stage and your information is sent out to presenters in the region, we will be in touch to get more specific about what your approximate fee range for touring would be. We then ask two short narrative questions The first is about the work that you would tour if you were selected. And the second is about the communities that you'd like to engage while you're touring. We then require one work sample and have the option to provide a second work sample. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing again and check out these Q&A questions. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for listening. Okay, so it looks like a lot of the questions are about the chat. So I am so sorry, everybody. I will make sure that everyone receives the links that I am talking about in this webinar as a follow-up. I'm really sorry about that technical glitch. But for reference, if you need it before you hear from me via email, midatlanticarts.org is going to have all the info you need. And you'll go to for presenters, because this is a presenter grant. And then you'll go to the Mid-Atlantic Tours tab, and that's where you'll see all the information about the roster artist interest form. Again, I will follow up with an email with all these links. So again, my apologies for that. Okay. I'm going to go through these in order here. Rivali asks, can a group of 4 dancers come together as a collective to be considered? Yes, that would be appropriate if you are touring a work or a short form evening of works and you would like to be considered as a group. That would be fine and appropriate. We ask that everyone, or that the majority of people in a group, if you are applying really with anyone more than a solo touring act, that the majority of people touring are based in the Mid-Atlantic region. And you would also need to keep in mind that even if you were collaborating across 4 artists, there would need to be one tour manager point of contact who was signing an MOU for all 4 of you and serving as your tour manager. All right, Dee Hansen asks, is this opportunity open only to individual artists, or is it also open to non-profit performing arts groups such as theater companies? It's a good question. You can absolutely be incorporated as a nonprofit theater company if you are touring and you meet all of the other guidelines. That's absolutely fine. And I'm happy to talk with you more specifically about your situation if you have further questions. But I would just encourage you to read through the guidelines, or rather the overview form, and just make sure that you are meeting the overall program requirements and that it feels like a good fit for your performing arts group. Yes, the recording will be available at midatlanticarts.org after the webinar, and I will also email it out when I send out the links from that should have gone in the chat. All right, Brent asks, are the tours limited to the Mid-Atlantic region, or can the tour be anywhere in the US? Great question. The tours are limited to the Mid-Atlantic region. The presenters who are eligible to receive Mid-Atlantic Tours subsidy must be based in one of Mid-Atlantic Arts states or jurisdictions. We do have other programs that serve the full US through our international programs. And if you're a presenter interested in that and you're outside of the Mid-Atlantic region, I would encourage you to check those out. Joan asks, we have self-managed tours for 25 years. How would we find a tour manager? Joan, it sounds like if you've self-managed for 25 years, it would be absolutely appropriate for you to serve as your own tour manager. And that is admissible for companies and artists who have experience doing that. So that is a-okay, and that's in the overview. There's no need to contract a new person if that's something that you already have experience doing. For self-managed artists, we will ask if you advance to the final stage that you provide us with a reference for a presenter you've worked with recently to speak to your tour management. An anonymous attendee asks, is it okay to have more than one program to tour with? For example, one program in fall 2024 and another in spring 2025. It is definitely admissible to have multiple projects that you may tour with. You can also consider having projects at different price points, considering that we have a breadth of presenters in our region, and it may make sense to offer different price points to be able to engage with multiple presenters if that's something that is of interest to you and if that is an authentic representation of the work you're making. What you're describing about splitting it up by time, to my knowledge, hasn't happened, at least not recently, but it could be possible. So if you would like to speak more about it, I'd be happy to do that. I think at the end of the day, you'll want to have work that is both the work you want to be touring and are ready to tour at that time, and the work that presenters are interested in. And so if that means different engagements for different parts of the touring cycle, that makes sense to me. Abe asks, are artists required to reside within the Mid-Atlantic region during the touring period? For example, if an artist applies from Maryland, but then moves to North Carolina in 2024, et cetera. I would say our preference would be to engage with artists that are based in the Mid-Atlantic region. And considering the selection criteria, your application, your submission is going to be more competitive if you're an artist who resides in the region. Of course, if something comes up and you're selected for the roster, we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But if you know that you generally reside in North Carolina, but sometimes live in Maryland, I think that would probably be a less competitive submission, but we could talk about it further if you'd like. An anonymous attendee asks, can you only choose fall 24 or spring 25? No, the touring period is from July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So if you are submitting to the roster artist interest form, you need to be available and interested in touring during that full touring period. Okay. Camilla asks, we have a stand-up show. Which category is that? Multidisciplinary? Yeah, I would say multidisciplinary or potentially theater, whichever feels like the best fit for you. Will an artist have a competitive chance if their target community is not localized to a subsidized demographic, but instead hopes to engage with all human beings? It's a good question. Yeah, I think we want to know who you want to engage with through your work. That's what that question is asking. And so I would say we want to hear authentically who those communities are that you're interested in engaging with. And so if for you, that is everyone, that is your answer. Lynn asks, must you propose and tour only one program, or can you tour two programs? I discussed this already. Quick reiteration, you can propose multiple programs to tour for this program. Erica asks, can an artist apply without having a manager at this time, and does that affect possible selection? So the artist will need to either have experience self-managing their tour or have a tour manager that they've worked with already or that they can engage if they move on to a finalist stage of the roster artist interest form process. It would affect possible selection in that would fall into the tour readiness adjudication category. If you don't have someone ready to go to manage, we would consider that as potentially being less ready to tour. And so I'm happy to talk with you about that or think through, what that might look like for your situation specifically. But by the time you were selected for the roster, you would need to have a tour manager in place because that is the person who signed the MOU. Johanna asks, more or less, how many applications you receive. So this is the second year that we've done this process. Last year was the first, and we received over 90 submissions to the interest form. I anticipate we'll have even a few more than that this year. And so it is a substantial and fairly competitive process. As I mentioned, we will be selecting 6 roster artists for the program. And so again, the interest form is not a grant application. It is a way to indicate your interest in being considered. We do try to keep the submission form process as kind of straightforward and streamlined as possible, acknowledging that every single submission like this that you fill out as an artist is your time and your labor. We're balancing that knowledge with the desire to keep this process transparent and open so that lots of people can get their name seen by the curatorial advisors and by Mid-Atlantic Arts. And so I'm really open to feedback about that. This is only the second year we've done this, but yeah, it is competitive. I expect 100, potentially more submissions. Janice asks, when you ask for a tour fee estimate, is it per show, per half week, per week, etc.? So what we're asking here is for the engagement, which would be at least one public performance and at least one community engagement activity, plus housing or travel. So for you, that might be a week or half a week, but it would not be per show. It would be for the full scope of the requirements for the program, which at a minimum, again, includes one live performance and one additional community engagement activity. Karen asks, is this application for individual artists, parentheses, presenters, or a nonprofit organization that tours its production? So Karen, great question. I'm gonna define, or I'm gonna share how Mid-Atlantic Arts is defining artist and presenter to answer this question. So when we say artist, we're talking about the individual or organization, which could include nonprofits, that are generating and creating the work to be toured. So they are the makers. They are making the work and they are touring the work. We define presenter as an organization who works with an artist, who invites an artist into their community to present a work that was developed outside of the regular operations of that presenter's day-to-day work. So a presenter would be someone who is engaging the artist. So the application, the interest form, I should say, that we're talking about here today is for artists who would be interested in being considered for the roster. The artists on the roster will not receive a grant from Mid-Atlantic Arts. Those grants will go directly to presenters who invite the roster artists into their community to do an engagement, which at a minimum has one public performance and one community engagement activity. I hope that helps. Feel free to add another question in if needed. Does the website include, Deanna asks, does the website include a list of the 2023-2024 Mid-Atlantic Arts roster? It sure does. And you can find that on our website under the Mid-Atlantic Tours section. We have a fabulous list of artists this 23-24 cycle who all went through this interest form process as well. They are available. You can check out the work that they're touring, and we are in process of awarding the grant to the presenters who will be engaging those artists for 23-24 right now. So you can see a list of presenters who will be working with those 23-24 artists, certainly by the fall. Anonymous asks, and you're only selecting a total of 6. That's correct. We are selecting 6 artists from the submission process, and that is the capacity that we have in terms of the funding we have available to make the tours meaningful for the artists. Rachel asks, can you help me understand the difference between Arts Connect and Mid-Atlantic Tours? If we're interested venue partners, is it better for them to apply? If we interested venue partners, is it better for them to apply on our behalf? So I think these are 2 different questions. So I'll start with the question discussing the difference between Arts Connect and Mid-Atlantic Tours. Arts Connect is another program of Mid-Atlantic Arts, which is a consortium-based program for presenters, as I described it before, which means a presenter being an institution that brings artists into their community to share a performance work that was developed outside of the operations of the presenter. So in Arts Connect, 2 or more presenters partner to present the same artist or company within the touring period. So an Arts Connect consortium can work with any artist they want. They do not need to work within a roster structure. They can select any artist, whether it's in their geographic community, somewhere else in the US, or anywhere in the world. So if you are an artist and you are not selected for Mid-Atlantic Tours, something you could consider is reaching out to presenters that you may work with in the region and seeing if they are interested in partnering to apply for an Arts Connect grant to engage your work. Then Mid-Atlantic Tours, as we've talked about today, is a roster program. So this is a program where 6 artists will have the opportunity to get engaged by presenters in the Mid-Atlantic region with a project that they propose, that you propose through this interest form process. And those tours are subsidized by Mid-Atlantic Arts. So we provide up to 50% of the artist fee to the presenter directly for those tours. So the second part of your question, if you have interested venue partners, is it better for them to apply on your behalf? No, not necessarily. We just want to make sure that we have the information in our interest form system so that the curatorial advisors and later Mid-Atlantic Arts staff can review it. Okay, Rebecca asks, I noticed that the work sample is listed as unedited video. Our only video was from a live streamed performance. The video is quite good, however, the sound is not well balanced. We have numerous audio recordings from concerts. Would an audio recording diminish our chances of being selected? No, not at all. It would not diminish your chances. I would say that the guidance about unedited video is really speaking more towards a reel or a highly produced like video that is chopped into snippets of your work. We'd love to see, or the curatorial advisors would love to see, more complete sections of performance rather than 2 minutes of 30-second clips, for example. If you are if you're a musician and your medium is audio and you're submitting an audio recording, that would be totally appropriate. And I'm happy to answer any other specific work sample questions as they come up. An anonymous attendee asks, hello, I have a question regarding presenting my group if selected. Depending on the venue size, my group can be a 4 to 5 piece, or certain bigger shows we have up to 20 musicians with dancers. Is there a way to describe these in the same application as possibilities, or is Mid-Atlantic Arts looking for a specific size group and show type right up front? So this is a great question. For the submission form, for the interest form, this is something you could describe in that question 13 about what work or works the artist would tour if selected. I recognize that the fee range only gives the opportunity to select one. You'd be welcome to make a note in the other section of the fee range that you have sort of two price points, one for a smaller iteration of your work and one for a larger one. So happy to talk about your situation specifically, but that's the overview answer that, yeah, that would be fine to submit. Jeff asks, just to clarify, the tour manager could potentially be one of the performing members of the touring ensemble. Yes, that is fine as long as that performing member has experience managing tours in the past. Edward asks, will a preference be given to new and emerging artists in determining the roster? Great question. Not necessarily. As you saw, that's not part of our selection criteria. We do have that tour readiness question built in there, and so that will be considered, but we also definitely want to support artists who are emerging in the field. The tour readiness question is definitely meant to make sure that the artists selected are ready for this kind of tour, that they feel prepared, and that we are setting them up for success with this work. But it is certainly not a bad thing to be new and emerging, nor is it a bad thing to be an established touring artist. Anonymous asks, for a work sample for pitching a live performance, would a live in the studio video be okay, or would it need to be a video of a live performance? A live in the studio would be fine. I think if you have a live performance, that may help the curatorial advisors get a sense of what your live performance is like, you know, to get a sense of it. But if the best work sample you have to describe the performance is a studio video, I think that is okay too. Okay. Quick water break. So Toria asks, I'm sorry I came on late. Do you have to already have a booking agent? Where are the tours? Do you set up your own tour? So Toria, I'm going to invite you to rewatch the recording when we send it around, because I do answer all those questions very briefly. You need to have a tour. You need to have a booking agent, or someone within your ensemble needs to have experience. The tours go to anywhere in Mid-Atlantic Arts geographic region. And in terms of setting up the tour tour manager works directly with presenters in the region to negotiate the terms of your tour, and then they work with Mid-Atlantic Arts to allocate the recommendations for the presenter subsidy. Rebecca asks, also, we have been self-managing, but I've been looking for an artist manager but not have any success. Is there a list of such people? We don't keep a list of tour managers. No, that's not something that we have available. I might invite you to check out past year's rosters to see who people are working with. Some of the roster artists for 23-24 are self-managed. Some have tour managers. I would also encourage you to just take a look at artists in the region who are touring right now, whose work you admire or whose work you feel some kinship with, and see how they're handling tour management, and go from there to start a conversation. Again, while we don't have a list, happy to brainstorm with you if you want to set up a time to talk and just think about how you might approach that. Joan asks, is last year's roster available? Yes, it's at midatlanticarts.org. Definitely encourage you to check out the artists that are touring, that will be touring in 23-24 through the roster. Rivali asks, for an artist who has self-managed, how does one demonstrate this experience? We're mostly going to trust you that you are set up to do this. But as I mentioned, if you do make it to the finalist stage and we're sending your info out to the presenters in the region, we will ask for you to provide a presenter reference of someone you've worked with recently if you're a self-managed artist. Ekaterina asks, our production manager and stage manager often toggle shared responsibilities of a tour manager. Would it be okay to list them both, or would we need to list only one for the tour manager role? So you don't actually have to list who your tour manager is in the interest form. You just have to indicate what your plan is. If you are moving forward to the finalist stage, we will talk with you about that. And do keep in mind that if you're selected for the roster, you would need to have one person serving as the point of contact for our MOU. That person will be the tour manager, officially responsible for communicating with Mid-Atlantic Arts. But you're welcome to work as a team. I know many artist companies work collaboratively in this way, and I'm happy to work with you on that. I just also need like one person who's gonna like get that MOU, get that email. And multiple people are welcome to come to the planning meetings. Like it's definitely possible to have a collaborative team. We would just need one point of contact. Lynn asks, can you tour a program and also offer a different virtual program to reach remote audiences? Yeah, that's a possibility. I think you could describe a little bit more about what you're thinking in your interest form submission and just state that as the two possible works that you would tour if you were selected. Joan asks, when you say two in one place, does that include an educational program that could take place in a local school, or is it two main stage performances at the same venue? So I think you're talking about two in that we require a minimum of one public performance and one additional community engagement activity. That community engagement activity could be a whole separate performance, but more often than not, it's another type of engagement activity that is working with your public performance to engage communities. So that could be, as you describe, an engagement in a local school. It could be a post-show discussion. It could be a series of workshops or conversations with folks in the community. It is really whatever feels like a good fit between you and the presenter that you're working with. Think broadly about that. And I'm happy to brainstorm too about what your community engagement might look like. Anonymous asks, can you share points of the selection priorities that will be considered? So I did talk through the kind of criteria points, and let me pull them up again just to mention them. So we have projected success for touring on the roster, like tour feasibility and presenter interest, broad representation from multiple performance genres, broad representation from artists based in different states or jurisdictions, and finally, prioritizing artists and creators who are actively engaged with diverse communities to engage the transformative power of the arts. So those are the four selection priorities that we're looking at and that we're encouraging the curatorial advisors to look at. And you can read those in the interest form overview. Anonymous asks, when submitting program samples, do they have to be the complete version of the work? They do not. We ask for a 5-minute timestamp, actually, if your work sample is longer than 5 minutes. I would encourage it to be at least 2 minutes so that the curatorial advisors can get a good sense of your work, but you should submit the best samples that show what your work is like and that you feel good about. They do not have to be the complete version. Carlo asks, if we apply with more than one production, do we make 2 separate applications? No, please do not. Please apply with the same application. And in your engagement activities answer that you submit, just indicate that you're interested in touring more than one production through the process. Carmia asks, we are a group and all of our performers are in the Mid-Atlantic region, but different areas. Which state do we put down as being from? Great question. In that case, you can, if you have a majority of folks in one place, you can put that down. If not, just select one and we will be in touch with you if you advance to the finalist stage to discuss further. Hillary asks, can the company be available to tour during a few specific months during the tour period, or must they be available the entire time? Good question. I would say that you will be more competitive in your application if you are available for the entire tour period. Of course, we want to maximize the amount of funding we can give out to support your tour. And we also want to make sure that presenters have the flexibility to work with you during that whole tour period, or as much of it as possible. Of course, there may be a few weeks that you have another thing or that you aren't touring, like that is absolutely reasonable. But if it's going to be like half of the tour period you are unavailable, I might consider applying in a future round. Anonymous asks, if we want to tour with a specific program in fall 24, fall 25, or in spring 25, is that okay? I think I already answered this, but very briefly, yes, that is okay. I would recommend just describing that in the works that you're interested in touring, and just know that the process for this program is that you're negotiating directly with presenters, and so you may want to be a little bit flexible in that time period, but at the end of the day, we want to support the work that you are ready and excited to tour. So if that means 2 different works in 2 different time periods, that could potentially be doable. So Vanna asks how many artists will be selected. 6 roster artists will be selected. Kara asks, how would you define a community engagement activity versus a performance? So we acknowledge that performances are also community engagement activities. So we require through this program that you have a minimum of 1 public performance and 1 additional community engagement activity. So that could be something like a post-show discussion, a workshop, a community discussion. It can be very broad. I encourage you to collaborate with the presenters that you're working with to figure out what that looks like. But for the purposes of your submission form, I would talk about what you would be most excited to do in community with the folks that you're touring to. So whether that is hold a masterclass, workshop, any number of things. There's a whole bunch of ways that you as an artist engage with your community and communities you tour your work to. So we just want to hear about what that looks like. And I think that also answers Brent's question. Yes, what is considered a community engagement activity? Happy to talk further about community engagement activities too, if you have further questions. Dee Hansen asks, how many touring stops do selected artists usually make? Is it more of a one-off stop, or are larger touring schedules to multiple locations also considered? So that can depend on how much per engagement your tour costs, because we have a dedicated amount of funds for each artist on the roster, which we will know more about closer to when we are contracting with you, because it is determined by the funding we receive from the NEA. So it really depends. If your tour, if the work you're touring is, has a lot of artists involved and usually needs to stay for a week, it may be more expensive, and so you may have fewer stops on your tour. If you are, a solo artist or a smaller band and tour, with a relatively kind of inexpensive price point, you may be able to pack more stops into your tour. Rivali asks, could the presenter be one of the performing artists if engaging a group of artists? So for this question, I would encourage the potential presenter to read through the draft guidelines for this program and make sure that they are eligible as a presenter for the program. Generally, it would not work for a presenter to also be a member of the performing arts team, or the touring team, rather, the roster artists. But also, we all wear many hats and have layered identities in this field, and so I'm not going to say it's impossible. I would have that presenter start by reading over the guidelines for the program and seeing if they're eligible. All presenters who are receiving funding through Mid-Atlantic Tours need to be a registered 501c3, for example, and there's a number of other guidelines that they do have to meet. So have them take a look and reach out if they have any questions. Angela asks, if the primary performing artist on the roster may occasionally bring a collaborative artist on tour, depending on that artist's availability, how might that application be written? I think you can describe it just like that in the project that you plan to tour. Say, sometimes we tour with this other artist, and that affects the tour in these different ways. Concerning websites requested on application, is there a preference for the artist's website over the artist's webpage on an agency's website? No preference. Whatever you think is the best way for the curatorial advisement team to get a quick glance at the artist's online presence. Anonymous asks, so this is an Arts Connect question, not a Mid-Atlantic Tours question. They ask, Arts Connect requires 3 presenters from different regions for an artist to be eligible. Is that correct? For the past 2 touring cycles for Arts Connect, or funding cycles rather, excuse me. So for 22-23 and for 23-24, Arts Connect only required 2 presenters from 2 or more states or jurisdictions. I encourage you to make sure to check out the guidelines for FY25 for Arts Connect, which will also be released this fall, to get the most up-to-date answer for your question about whether we move back to 3 presenters. Anonymous asks, do you have a list of presenters available that have engaged artists on the roster last season? We don't keep that list necessarily as like a database, but we will be publishing the list of presenters who were awarded Mid-Atlantic Tours funds for the 23-24 roster artists. That will be available by fall of this year, if not before. We're currently finalizing the award to those presenters right now. Rivali asks, if multiple solo artists perform together, can the work sample be clips unedited together of each artist performing individually around 1 minute per artist? I think that would be fine. If you are all performing, or if what you're proposing to tour would be separate short form performances, that makes sense. If you're suggesting that you would present work that you're all performing together, but you have separate clips, I would encourage a clip of everyone performing together as well, something that reflects the work that you're trying to tour. But again, with the work samples, we acknowledge that it's been a pandemic. It's been hard to get good footage of performance. And so we'll take what you can get on that front. But what's going to be the most compelling work sample is going to be what gives the curatorial advisors the best sense of the work you're proposing to tour. Lynn asks, if you are selected, do you tour once during that time frame, or might you go on a shorter tour, return home, rehearse, and tour again? You absolutely would not need to block book your tour. The presenters could engage with you anytime during the project period, which again is July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So anytime during that period, you could work with a presenter to engage your company, and that would be when you tour. You could block book the whole thing if you wanted, and if you could figure that out with with the presenters you're working with, I would say it would be a challenge to do that, but it's possible. But yes, absolutely, you can work directly with the presenters, just as you would if you weren't a roster artist on the touring schedule that works best for you. Hillary asks, can the company be available to tour during a few specific months, or must they be available the entire time? I believe I answered this already, so just very briefly, you would be more competitive if you could tour the entire time. Although, of course, it is understandable that there may be windows that you are not available within that year-long touring period. Okay. For the work, Carmia asks, for the work sample for comedy, we have a variety of options. They're listed here. We can provide one performer doing a 5-minute set. We can provide 2 to 3 different performers doing 1 to 2 minutes, or we can provide our trailer. I'm just going to say what I said earlier. What's going to be most competitive for your work sample is what gives the curatorial advisors the best sense of what experiencing a public performance is like. So I can't really answer that for you based on not knowing your work. So, from knowing your work and knowing how you want it to be represented to the curatorial advisors, I would encourage you to just think about what is going to give the best representation of what seeing the work is like and experiencing the work is like. Jessa asks, is there a price range for what artists can ask? We could either tour a one-woman show or a production that includes 10 artists, so very different price points. So within the interest form, there are bulleted options for different price points that are, again, just a starting place so that the curatorial advisors and Mid-Atlantic Arts staff can understand better approximately what price range your work would tour inside of. So take a look at that. And then if you do decide to submit with both of those projects as options for the curatorial advisors, you can you could potentially enter into the other category that you are sort of in this range for this project and this other range for the other project. Hallie asks, could you define the role of a manager? I'm self-managed and wonder if I'm qualified. What is MOU? My sincere apologies for falling into acronym land. When I say MOU, I'm describing a memorandum of understanding, AKA letter of agreement. This is the agreement that the roster artist, ensemble will be signing with Mid-Atlantic Arts, and the person who signs that is going to be the tour manager. So that person is going to need to engage with Mid-Atlantic Arts for all of our back and forth logistics for the program. They will also need to be the point of contact that presenters can reach out to directly if they have questions about your work or if they want to book you for the, through the program. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out about that. Okay, Tanita asks, we have very different works in one evening. I would not be sure what would be best to send. Our trailer marketing would definitely give an example of the different choreography in one evening. Our website has many examples. So great to hear that you have experience touring and lots of options. For this program, I would really encourage you to think through what for your ensemble is the most compelling project that you'd like to tour, or if you'd like to propose multiple projects at different price points, that is totally fine. And to present that in the interest form. The curatorial advisors are going to have a lot to get through, and we want to see what you are most excited to tour in the region. And so it will be helpful if you can think through what you have available, what you might want to tour, what would best meet the selection criteria that I described, and propose those projects. Joan asks, we are a music group. Can our work sample have video editing if we don't edit the sound? Yes. The work samples, again, should just be the best representation of the work that you're interested in touring. Joan asks, how many performances do you expect a group to give in this period? Approximately 1 week, 1 a month. So the the tour manager works directly with the presenters to determine the touring schedule. So as I said before, if you were interested in block booking, you could do that. You could try to do that with the presenters that you're working with. If you want to space it out, you can space it out as long as all of the performances happen during the project period, which is July 1, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. Lynn asks, if the work is site-specific and can be performed outside as well as in a proscenium theater, would the work sample include both indoor and outdoor performance clips, or is it best to feature indoor staging and let the presenters know if the work can be presented outdoors as well if amphitheater is available? I hope I'm not sounding too much like a broken record here, but once again, I would say the work samples should be the best representation for the curatorial advisors of what your work is like. That may mean you do have the option to submit 2 work samples. You could submit 1 proscenium and 1 outdoor iteration. That's really up to you. Again, not knowing your work, I can't say for you what is the best representation of your work through a work sample, but that's the question I would invite you to ask yourself as you're selecting those work samples for this program. And with that, I think we are at the end of the questions that have been submitted. Okay, we do have one more. Anonymous asks, what is the average amount of engagement performance artists on the roster typically do in the year? There is no typical amount because it depends on the price point for the touring work. Mid-Atlantic Arts has a dedicated amount of funds available for each artist tour on the roster. Those funds go directly to presenters who work with those artists to subsidize the artist fee. So if you are touring with a show at a higher price point, you may have fewer stops on your tour. If you are touring at a lower price point, you may have more stops. One thing you could do would be to check out the FY24 Mid-Atlantic Tours artists schedules and patterns. And as I say that, I'm realizing that the timing may not work out this year for that, but I would just encourage you to think about, for you, what is the best price point, and understand that like Mid-Atlantic Arts is going to work with you on what number of stops on the tour that means for you when the time comes, if you're selected. And I will hang out for just a few more minutes to catch any other questions that come up. But I want to thank everyone for being here today. And I really want to encourage you to reach out to me if you have any further questions about the interest form. Emily says, thank you. Thank you. Hi, Emily. Yay. Thanks everyone for being here. Lots of thank yous. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time, and don't hesitate to reach out with other questions. Okay, Joan asks, if our artists live in different states, but our group is headquartered in one state, is that the state we use? Yes, I would encourage that. Anito asks, will this recording be shared through email? I was late to the webinar. Yes, we will send it out to all the registrants, and it will also be available at midatlanticarts.org in about a week. All right. I think we have pretty much come up. Oh, one more. Oh, thank you very much for that feedback, Joan. I appreciate it. And thank you again for being here. All right. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off, but do not hesitate to reach out with any other questions about the program, about Mid-Atlantic tours, or anything Mid-Atlantic Arts related. Thank you all. And thank you, Kara, for your live captioning support. Greatly appreciated. Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.